The rain against the St. Jude's Trauma Center windows sounded like a rhythmic hammering of nails into a coffin. Inside, the atmosphere was a toxic blend of antiseptic and exhaustion. The fluorescent lights flickered with a low-frequency hum, casting jittery shadows across the linoleum floors. In the basement morgue, the air was kept at a constant, bone-chilling 40 degrees. It was here, amidst the scent of formaldehyde and frozen silence, that the anomaly lived. Every Thursday at precisely 03 a.m., the digital log for the morgue intake fluctuated for a fraction of a second. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. But Stella was always looking. From her small monitor at the night shift nursing station, she watched Rack 4. On the grainy black and white feed, the heavy plastic of a body bag would ripple. Then, with a slow, mechanical precision, it would shift exactly 6 inches to the left. Stella sat perfectly still, her spine straight, a stark contrast to the slumped shoulders of the other nurses. Her hands, however, told a different story. They were trembling, a fine, rapid vibration that made the pens on her desk rattle. "Look at her," Nurse Kelly whispered from the break room door, loud enough for Stella to hear. "The shaky shadow is at it again. How did she even pass her boards? One look at a trauma patient and she starts vibrating like a cheap pager." Dr. Aris, the lead surgical resident with an ego larger than his paycheck, strode past and tossed a blood-crusted clipboard onto Stella's desk. The impact sprayed tiny droplets of red across her white sleeve. "Clean that up, shaky," Aris barked. "And once you've regained control of your motor functions, I need room 4 prepped for a debridement. Try not to drop the tray this time. Some of us are actually trying to save lives while you're just taking up space and oxygen." Stella didn't look up. She didn't defend herself. She simply picked up the clipboard. Her eyes remained fixed on the morgue monitor. The bag on rack 4 didn't just move this time. As the digital clock clicked to 0301, the bag slumped, and a faint plume of condensation escaped the zipper, the unmistakable sign of a warm breath meeting cold air. Stella's rattle intensified. It wasn't the shaking of a coward. It was the phantom adrenaline of a predator in a cage, a byproduct of a specialized neurological conditioning from a life she had tried to bury. She wasn't afraid of the body bag. She was afraid of what she would have to do when it finally opened. She stood up, her movements eerie and fluid despite the tremor in her fingers. "I'll handle room 4, doctor," she said, her voice a flat, melodic monotone. "Just move, Stella," Aris sneered, "before you vibrate yourself into a seizure." As she walked toward the supply closet, she passed a mirror. For a split second, the quiet nurse disappeared. In the reflection was a woman with the cold, calculating eyes of a ghost who had seen the end of the world. The Thursday body wasn't a corpse. It was a Trojan horse, and the gates were about to open. The code black alert began not with a siren, but with the sudden, violent death of the hospital's cellular network. One second, the interns were scrolling through their phones. The next, the screens were dead slabs of glass. Then came the chime, a low, pulsing, rhythmic tone that signaled a catastrophic security breach. "Lockdown," the overhead speakers crackled, the voice distorted by digital interference. "All personnel to stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." In the ER, chaos was a slow-motion explosion. Dr. Aris stood in the center of the bay, looking annoyed rather than panicked. "Check the routers. I have a surgery scheduled in 20 minutes. I don't care if it's a lockdown. My patient is a board member's son." Stella stood near the triage desk. She felt the shift in the air pressure before the doors even moved. The rattle in her hands suddenly stopped. The silence in her nerves was absolute, the hallmark of the Nightingale protocol. When the threat was abstract, she shook. When the threat was lethal, she became a statue. The main glass entrance exploded inward. It wasn't a car crash, it was a breach charge. Two men in tactical gray gear, wearing seamless ballistic masks, stepped through the cloud of pulverized glass. They carried suppressed submachine guns held in a professional low-ready position. These weren't amateurs looking for painkillers. They moved with the synchronized grace of a Tier 1 extraction unit. "Down, on the floor, now!" The lead operative screamed. The sound was muffled by his mask, but the authority was unmistakable. Panic erupted. A nurse screamed and tried to run toward the ICU. A short burst of gunfire shattered the ceiling tiles above her head, showering her in plaster. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Dr. Eris, his face pale and sweat-beaded, stepped forward, waving his hands. "Listen to me. I am the chief resident. You can't be in here. This is a sterile." The operative didn't even speak. He swung the butt of his weapon, catching Eris in the jaw. The doctor spun and hit the floor, his teeth clattering against the tile. Stella didn't scream. She didn't hide. She stepped backward, melting into the shadows of a recessed equipment alcove. She watched the way they moved. Pincer formation, checking corners. They were looking for the high-profile witness brought in earlier that night, a man the government called the architect. She saw the lead operative signal to his partner. They were heading for the elevators, which Stella knew were disabled during a code black, which meant they would take the service stairs, the stairs that led right past the oxygen storage. "Two shooters," Stella whispered to herself, her voice a ghost of a sound. "MP7s, level 3 plates. They think they're the only wolves in the building." She reached into her utility belt and pulled out a heavy-duty medical tape and a pair of trauma shears. She didn't need a gun to win a war in a hospital. She just needed the terrain. The mercenaries were moving fast now, dragging a terrified intern along as a human shield. They reached the hallway leading to the service stairs, their boots crunching on dropped charts and broken vials. "Move it, kid," the second mercenary growled, shoving the intern toward the heavy steel door. From the shadows of an alcove, a voice rang out. It was soft, almost hesitant. "You're in the wrong wing." The mercenaries spun, their weapons tracking toward the sound. They saw Stella standing in the middle of the hallway. She looked small, her oversized scrubs hanging off her frame. Her hands were tucked into her pockets. "Get on the ground, bitch!" the lead operative roared, stepping toward her. "You haven't checked your 6, Stella said calmly. The operative scoffed, but for a microsecond, his eyes flickered toward his partner. That was all she needed. Stella didn't run. She launched. She used a heavy-duty stainless steel IV pole as a vaulting tool, swinging her body around the corner with terrifying centrifugal force. Her heavy nursing clogs, designed for grip, caught the operative in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. As he stumbled back, his partner tried to level his MP7. Stella was already inside his guard. She grabbed the barrel, diverting the muzzle into the floor as he squeezed off a round. The sound was a dull thud, thud, thud into the linoleum. With her free hand, Stella pulled a standard plastic ballpoint pen from her pocket. She didn't stab blindly. She drove the tip with the precision of a surgeon into the soft gap of the operative's tactical vest, right where the neck meets the shoulder, the brachial plexus. The man's arm went instantly limp. The weapon fell from his numb fingers. Stella caught it before it hit the floor, flipped it in the air, and used the heavy stock to smash the lead operative's visor as he tried to stand. The glass cracked, the man groaned, and went down. In less than 4 seconds, 2 elite mercenaries were on the floor. The intern stared at Stella, his mouth agape. "What are you?" the boy stammered. Stella didn't answer. She was looking at the MP7 in her hands. She checked the chamber, flicked the safety, and then, with a look of intense distaste, she threw the gun into a biohazard bin. "I'm a nurse," she said, her hands beginning to vibrate again as the rattle returned. "And you need to get to the basement. Tell the morgue attendant to evacuate rack 4. Tell him Nightingale is awake." The sirens of the responding SWAT teams were finally audible over the rain. Inside the ER, the tension hadn't dissipated. It had curdled. Dr. Eris sat on a gurney, a nurse dabbing at his split lip. When he saw Stella walk back into the main bay, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pure, petty rage. He had been humiliated. He had been seen cowering while the shaky nurse stood her ground. "There she is," Eris shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "That's her! She's with them!" The hospital's chief of medicine, Dr. Sterling, stepped forward, flanked by 2 armed security guards. Sterling was a man of politics and optics, his silver hair perfectly coiffed even in a crisis. "Stella, what is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded. "Dr. Eris says you provoked the gunmen. He says you interfered with their demands and nearly got the entire staff executed. He says you were talking to them like you knew them." Stella stood in the center of the room. The rattle was back in full force now, her fingers twitching at her sides. To the onlookers, she looked like a guilty woman on the verge of a breakdown. "I neutralized the threat in the North Corridor," Stella said, her voice low. "There are more coming. We need to evacuate the ICU. The target isn't the witness. It's the oxygen farm." "Listen to her," Eris laughed hysterically. "She's hallucinating. She probably set the whole thing up to play hero. Look at her hands. She's a junkie or a mental patient. I want her badge, now." Sterling nodded slowly. "Stella, you're relieved of duty. Give your badge to security. We'll be handing you over to the authorities for questioning once the perimeter is secure." Stella looked at Sterling. She saw the way his eyes avoided the cameras in the North Corridor. She saw the way his hand hovered near his pocket, clutching a burner phone. "The cameras in the North Corridor were wiped 30 seconds before the breach, weren't they, Dr. Sterling?" Sterling stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do, because you sold the bypass codes. You think this is about a witness, but they're here to burn the evidence of your special projects in the basement, and you're framing me to cover the trail." "Take her," Sterling barked at the guards. As the guards moved in, Stella didn't fight. She surrendered her badge, but as she handed it over, she leaned in close to Sterling. "I've spent 3 years pretending to be broken so I wouldn't have to kill people like you. Don't make me break the streak." Stella didn't go to the security office. The moment the guards turned their heads to address a radio call, she vanished. In a hospital, a nurse is invisible. She moved through the service ducts, her body memory taking over. She reached the morgue 5 minutes later. The air here was thicker, smelling of ozone and something metallic. Thursday, rack 4. She approached the bag that had breathed. She didn't open it with her hands. She used a long-handled scalpel she'd lifted from a prep tray. She sliced the heavy plastic. Inside was not a body. It was a sophisticated, military-grade server array, humming with a low-frequency vibration. It was wired directly into the hospital's main power grid. "It's a siphon," she murmured. This wasn't just about trafficking or local corruption. St. Jude's was built on the site of an old Cold War bunker. The server was siphoning data from the federal building across the street, a regional NSA hub. The Thursday bodies were actually high-capacity hard drives being swapped out every week. The hospital wasn't just a hospital, it was a listening post. "You were always too observant, Stella," a voice boomed from the doorway. It was Miller, the head of security. He wasn't wearing his hospital uniform anymore. He was wearing a tactical vest, a suppressed Glock 17 held firmly in his grip. "Miller," Stella said, not turning around. "I should have known. The way you check your corners, the way you keep your weight on the balls of your feet. You're Blackwood alumni, aren't you?" "Ex-contractor," Miller said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Sterling is just a puppet. He thinks we're moving organs. He has no idea we're moving secrets that can start wars. And you're a legend, Nightingale. We all heard about the Damascus ghost who disappeared. To find you here, scrubbing floors, it's pathetic." "I liked the floors," Stella said, finally turning. Her hands were perfectly still. The rattle was gone. "They're easy to keep clean, unlike your work." "Goodbye, Commander." and Miller squeezed the trigger. The suppressed gunshot was a soft cough in the basement's acoustics. Stella didn't wait for the bullet. She had already kicked the wheeled gurney in front of her. The heavy steel frame absorbed the round with a loud ping. She dived behind a rack of liquid nitrogen canisters used for cryopreservation. "You're out of practice," Miller taunted, firing again. The bullet hissed past her ear, shattering a glass cabinet of specimen jars. Stella didn't have a gun. She had a basement. She grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen and cracked the main valve. The pressurized gas hissed out in a blinding, freezing white cloud. In seconds, the visibility in the morgue dropped to 0. "I don't need practice," Stella's voice echoed through the fog, seemingly coming from everywhere. "I need you to stay exactly where you are." Miller panicked. He began firing in a wide arc, the muzzle flashes illuminating the mist like strobe lights. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Stella moved with the silence of a shadow. She wasn't walking, she was prowling. She reached the wall where the lead X-ray aprons were stored. She grabbed 2, wrapping them around her left arm like a makeshift shield. She found a heavy-duty defibrillator on a crash cart. She ripped the paddles free and set the charge to maximum. Miller heard a click behind him. He spun, his gun raised. Stella wasn't there. She was below him. She swept his legs with a heavy mop handle, sending him crashing onto the wet, slick floor. As he fell, she slammed the defibrillator paddles against the metal floor grate he was touching. "Clear," she whispered. She pressed the trigger. 600 joules of electricity surged through the water and the metal. Miller's body arched violently, his muscles seizing in a grand mal spike. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. Stella stood over him, the fog beginning to clear. She didn't look triumphant. She looked bored. "You forgot the first rule of hospital combat, Miller. Never fight the person who knows exactly how the heart stops." Stella stood in the center of the morgue, the Glock held in a perfect, relaxed grip. Miller was unconscious, his breathing ragged. She reached into Miller's vest and pulled out his encrypted comms unit. She dialed a number she hadn't touched in 3 years, a number burned into the back of her eyelids. The line picked up on the first ring. No hello, just silence. "This is Nightingale," Stella said. "Identification, November, India, GHT. Authorization, 79 Alpha Echo." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Nightingale? We had you listed as permanently compromised. Where the hell are you?" "St. Jude's Trauma Center, Sector 4, Stella said, her voice regaining the steel of a commanding officer. "I have a code black in progress. We have a foreign intelligence siphon operating out of the basement. Local admin is compromised. I have 1 contractor down, multiple shooters on site. I need a level 5 sweep and a clean team, and I need them 5 minutes ago." "The director isn't going to like this, Stella. You walked away. You're technically a deserter." "Then he can court-martial me after I save this city," Stella snapped. "The shooters aren't just here for the server. They've rigged the oxygen storage. If they blow it, the entire hospital becomes a fuel air bomb. Thousands of civilians, my nurses, my patients." "Copy that, Nightingale. We have a strike team in the air. ETA 6 minutes. Can you hold the line?" Stella looked at her hands. They were starting to shake again, the trauma of the Damascus blast screaming in her nerves. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "I don't have a choice." She hung up, grabbed a bag of trauma supplies, and headed back toward the elevators. The war was moving upstairs. The lobby of St. Jude's was a fortress of confusion. SWAT teams were arguing with hospital security, while Dr. Sterling tried to maintain control of the narrative. "I'm telling you, she's dangerous," Sterling was shouting at a police captain. "The nurse, Stella, she's the one who led them here." Suddenly, the sound of heavy rotors drowned out the rain. 3 blacked-out MH-6 Little Bird helicopters dropped from the clouds, hovering inches above the hospital parking lot. Men in matte black tactical gear with NSA SOG patches rappelled down, moving with a speed that made the local SWAT look like children playing soldier. At the center of the formation was a man in a dark suit, General Vance, the Deputy Director of Covert Operations. Sterling ran toward him, his hands raised. "Sir, thank God. I'm the Chief of Medicine. I have everything under—" The general didn't even slow down. His security detail shoved Sterling aside hard enough he hit a planter. The general stopped in the middle of the ER. His eyes swept the room until they landed on a small, blood-stained figure sitting on a bench, holding a pressure bandage to an intern's arm. Stella stood up. The general walked toward her. The entire ER fell silent. Dr. Eris watched from the corner, his jaw dropping. The general stopped 2 feet from Stella. He stood at attention, and then he snapped a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the air. "Commander Vance," the general said, his voice echoing in the hall. Stella didn't salute back. She just nodded. "You're late, Paul." "We moved as fast as the weather allowed," the general said, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Report." "The server is secured in the morgue. Miller is tied up next to rack 4. But we have a problem. The lead operative is still active, and he has the trigger for the O2 farm." "Who is he?" Stella looked at the crowd of doctors. She looked at the man who had been the most helpful during the crisis. "He's not a mercenary," Stella said, pointing her finger. "He's the one who's been here the whole time." The finger was pointed directly at Dr. Eris. "Me?" Eris shrieked, his voice hitting a glass-shattering pitch. "She's insane! General, she's been vibrating and talking to herself all night. I'm a surgeon. I save lives." "You're a disgrace to the coat," Stella said, walking toward him. The SOG operators moved with her, their weapons leveled. "You weren't mocking me because you thought I was weak, Eris," Stella said. "You were mocking me to keep me beneath your notice. You needed a shaky nurse to blame if things went wrong. You're the one who moved the bags. You're the one who calibrated the siphon. Only a surgeon would know how to wire a server into a power grid without causing a surge." Eris's face transformed. The cowardice vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant mask. He reached into his lab coat. "Don't!" the general yelled. Eris didn't pull a Vone. He pulled a small, silver remote. "The oxygen farm is rigged," Eris said, his voice now calm and devoid of his previous whining. "One click, and this entire hospital becomes a sun. I don't care about the server anymore. I just care about leaving. Stella, you were a fool to come out of the shadows. You could have lived a long, quiet life as a broken nurse." "I tried," Stella said, "but you kept making a mess on my floors." "Everyone back," Eris shrieked, backing toward the exit. "One step and we all burn." The SOG team froze. They couldn't risk a shot. The remote was a dead man's switch. If his heart stopped, the signal would send. Stella didn't move. She just looked at her hands. "Eris," she said, "do you know why my hands shake?" Eris sneered. "Because you're a coward." "No," Stella said. "It's because my nerves are tuned to a frequency of 180 beats per minute. I'm not shaking from fear. I'm shaking because I'm waiting for the signal to strike." In a blur of motion that no human eye could track, Stella grabbed a heavy, lead-lined chart from the desk. She didn't throw it at Eris. She threw it at the fire sprinkler above his head. The heavy metal hit the glass bulb. A torrent of water exploded downward. Eris flinched, the water blinding him for a split second. Stella was on him. She didn't hit him. She grabbed his hand, the one holding the remote, and used a specialized nerve pinch on his wrist. His fingers locked in an open position. He couldn't click. He couldn't squeeze. She twisted the remote out of his hand and in the same motion drove her knee into his solar plexus. Eris collapsed, gasping for air as the SOG team swarmed over him. The morning sun began to break through the clouds, casting long orange streaks across the wet pavement of the ambulance bay. The hospital was a hive of federal activity. Evidence bags were being carried out of the morgue. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Eris were being loaded into separate armored vans. Stella stood by the coffee machine in the lobby, her hands wrapped around a paper cup. They were shaking again, the familiar, rhythmic rattle. General Vance walked up to her. He looked tired. "The siphon was deeper than we thought," he said. "They had links to 3 other hospitals in the tri-state area. You saved more than just this building, Stella." "I just wanted to finish my shift," she said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "You can't stay here," Vance said. "Your cover is blown. The agency wants you back. Nightingale is too valuable to be emptying bedpans." Stella looked at the ER. She saw Nurse Kelly, who's sitting on a step, crying. She saw the interns helping a patient into a wheelchair. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a new badge, one the general had brought for her. It didn't say Commander. It said Stella Vance, RN. "I'm not going back, Paul," she said. "The world has enough soldiers. It doesn't have enough people who stay behind to clean up the mess." The general looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "The agency will keep a shadow detail on the perimeter. You won't even know they're there." "I'll know," Stella smiled. "Tell them if they park in the doctor's lot, I'll have them towed." As the general walked away, Stella turned back toward the ER. The code black was over, but the day shift was arriving. "Stella!" Nurse Kelly called out, her voice shaky. I'm sorry about what I said. Can you help me with room 12? The patient is crashing." Stella looked at her hands. She took a deep breath, and the rattle settled into a dull, manageable hum. "On my way," Stella said. She walked toward the room, her footsteps steady. She was no longer a ghost, and she was no longer a secret. She was a nurse, and she had work to do. But as she passed rack 4, she noticed something. The log didn't just flicker, it went dark. The real threat wasn't in the bags. It was in the basement below the basement. And next Thursday was only 7 days away.